You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 Live. Hurricane Dorian has intensified throughout the day and has passed over the Virgin Islands just north of Puerto Rico as well. It's now got winds of 80 miles per hour and a pressure, we're estimating 996 millibars, just one below what the National Hurricane Center is saying. Also, Tropical Storm Podul is moving towards the southern coast of Hainan, China, and onto Vietnam, where it could deliver significant amounts of rainfall. Of course, Dorian is the main feature tonight. Over the next 5 days, it could become a major hurricane and strike the coast of Florida. At the moment, we are seeing percentage chances already getting towards 2/3 for parts of the Florida coast for tropical storm conditions. The storm itself has a decent chance of reaching Category 3 status on some part of its journey. There's the track map right now. I guess we'll leave that on the screen for a moment or two whilst we introduce the team tonight. We're going to stay with you for a while. You can send in your questions at any time. Start your message with Force 13. I'm joined tonight. My name's Nathan Foy, and I'm joined by several people. David, Dane, Euxinator, Orlando, Sam, and Strat, all here tonight. Good evening to you,
everybody.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm actually seeing this for the first time. I've not seen the National Hurricane Center's track map yet. This is the new one that's just come out. They're expecting a major hurricane landfall and for it to keep going over central Florida, implying perhaps that it could reach the Gulf of Mexico.
I think that cone is a little bit farther south than the one at the last advisory was.
Yeah, I think a lot of the forecasts that I've seen have it aimed either somewhere in Gainesville or somewhere close to Sarasota. Nowhere in between.
Interesting. A sharp gust of wind there in the background as well, by the sounds of things.
Regardless of the track changes, there's a marked change in the intensity forecast from the National Hurricane Center. I logged on to my computer at my desk today for the first time. I had yesterday's 5 p.m. advisory saying the max they were expecting was 70 miles per hour. Come today, 18 hours later, they're saying it's going to be a major hurricane. And now models are going to have it potentially still be a hurricane if it ends up going over the Gulf of Mexico. The 5-day cone has the margin of error having it be potentially in the Gulf of Mexico at this time.
Massive change.
I was surprised almost because a lot of the models were showing it kind of dissipate from 24 hours ago to now and then reforming near the Bahamas. And that's been a stark change that we've seen develop.
This whole episode,
now an unexpected hurricane.
This whole episode of Dorian and its intensification can be traced back to that very crucial relocation of its center just after it moved over St. Lucia. That appears to have been a game changer for this storm because not only has it missed Hispaniola, but it's pretty much missed Puerto Rico as well, and it's doing just fine as a result. No buffer at all, really, in its strengthening due to land interaction. And further strengthening is likely, and the National Hurricane Center might be going a little bit low on the intensities for up to the next 48 hours. Obviously, rapid intensification is very difficult to predict, but there's no saying that it can't do that anytime in the next 2 days.
Yes, this is a very scary storm, and as someone who lives in Central Florida, I'm very concerned, especially because most of my friends, they even live in Gainesville or in Tampa area. However, saying that, I think that this storm has potential to wreak a lot of havoc on Florida. Unlike Irma, which weakened a lot once it hit Key West.
Yes. Now, some people in the community getting rather excited talking about Category 5 status. I can assure you that there is an extremely remote chance of that happening with this storm. We're giving it about a 0.3% chance, in case you wanted to know. Chance of Category 4, a little bit higher though, about 15%, and chance of Category 3, about 65% at this point.
Another notable thing is that this is an unusual track, too.
Sam, please.
Yes, I do want to jump in with some breaking news. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has issued a state of emergency executive order for 26 East Florida counties. This includes the counties of Baker, Bradford, Brevard, Broward, Clay, Duval, Flagler, Glades, Hendry, Highlands, Indian River, Lake, Martin, Miami, Monroe, Nassau, Okeechobee, Orange, Osceola, Palm Beach, Putnam, Seminole, St. John's, St. Lucia, Volusia, and Union, which covers a lot of Florida's east coast.
Certainly does, and who knows, that might be extended. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was going to say another notable thing with this situation, that this is another unusual kind of west-east track. Is there really any analogs for a track of this kind that we're currently forecast to see?
East-west track.
A little bit of Bay.
Well, yes, Strat. The one that springs to mind really is Dora. 1964, a forgotten storm for many people, I imagine, by the silence that greeted me there. That struck Florida. I think it was was it high in Category 2, or was it stronger than that? I struggle to remember now, but I'll look things up for you and find out some more analogs, Strat.
I was gonna say I have the track right now. The east to west kind of thing is somewhat of an analog, but nothing through the Caribbean up that way. Dora came from the main development region, tracked north past the Lesser Antilles, and then took a westward track from there.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Dorian's coming through the Lesser Antilles.
One very notable one, which is something that Dorian could have done. Had it stayed further south and really got some intensity, although it was quite far behind, is the Okeechobee hurricane of 1928, which moved along the Dominican Republic coast, was a Category 4 at that point, so it was already doing very well. It reached Category 3 before reaching the Lesser Antilles, so hardly a comparison in intensity, but it then moved through the Bahamas, struck Florida as a Category 4, moved over Lake Okeechobee. This one has a lot more of a bend in its track towards the north. That's the only one really that was in the Caribbean before it reached Florida that struck. I mean, not really as much of a right angle either, that one. So I suppose
I just want to note that there's also, I think, Faye. It reminds me a bit of Faye's track a little bit.
Faye?
Faye from 2008, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't look at that on an intensity level, though, obviously.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Faye was much weaker, but it did have a similar track.
Nah, because it makes landfall from a completely different angle inside of Florida.
Well, true. But apart from that, I mean, this is pretty much a track that we haven't really seen. Now, people might panic at that thought, but, you know, there are so many variables in this field that you can often get tracks that we've never seen before. But it does mean that the risk for that particular area, whichever gets struck, will have more of an issue or a different kind of issue than what they're used to dealing with, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah, a notable thing with this is that storm surge is going to be impacting
that's the big one.
Different area than we're used to seeing as well.
Storm surge is the big one, but looking at model strat, rainfall estimates for Florida, if the storm does track over land, are going to be huge. 12 inches plus we're seeing already.
Which models are showing that at the moment?
GFS on the forecast, 12 inches or more.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look and see what the HWRF says.
Now that's the same GFS that was only predicting 3 inches for the Caribbean islands. Was later up to 5 inches just before it struck the Virgin Islands. Whether 5 inches have actually fallen over there, if anyone knows, please let us know, I suppose.
HWRF wants 8 inches at least over large swaths of central Florida and some pockets of 16 plus. Once it gets closer to the west coast of the Panhandle as well. when we're getting to the 5-day mark, 126-hour mark. So, and also market increase in rainfall total predictions from the models as well. And speaking of that, what does that make the current CDPS rating for parts of Florida at this point in time?
So Florida now under a CDPS stage 5 for Dorian at this time. Stage 5 out of the 10-tiered scale. 5 is quite significant, severe really. I can't quite think as to what other storms were stage 5. Wasn't... Oh, I'm trying to think back now to US landfalls. Was Florence a stage 5 when it made landfall?
Possibly. I'm not quite sure, because most of the time you're tracking it, it was a stage 7.
It was 7 or 8, and then it went down, obviously, because Florence weakened. And I think it was a 5 at landfall, maybe a 6.
Yeah. It's something to notice, though, that if the storm were to increase in size more than forecast, that rating would also increase in tandem.
Naturally.
They are, yes, yeah, and that's where, since I'm from Tampa, it would impact me, of course. Now, I do think that, they did say the storm would get bigger. It's forecasted to get bigger. Like, I don't know how bigger, but, like, it's forecasted at least, to get larger in size.
Still won't be the hugest storm out there, but yeah, it will grow. It won't be anywhere near as big as Florence, for instance.
Or Irma.
Or Irma.
Irma literally covers the entire state.
Yeah, if you look at comparison size on the map, Dorian, its whole size right now is about equivalent to the convection that's been sheared off of Tropical Depression Erin.
Oh dear,
It's about the same size, which goes to show that this is still a really small storm. It's only about the size of most in Hispaniola at this point in time. So as the storm has clear water and more favorable environments to develop, if it does start to get towards major hurricane status in the next 72 hours, especially if it does it very quickly, then you could start to see an eye-wall replacement cycle happen, and that could increase the size of the storm more markedly.
Usually does. And maybe that's what the National Hurricane Center are bearing in mind in their forecast. They're calling for very gradual intensification over a 3-day period, and that could factor in an eye-wall replacement cycle too.
Yeah. And then you also have to factor in if the long-term models are right, we're going 5 to 7 days, which is still very uncertain at this point in time. If it does actually track over Florida, over the more flat areas that are able to draw more moisture of the central part of the panhandle, not really weaken that much, that could also help enlarge the storm even more as it goes over the Gulf of Mexico, potentially a week after now.
I need to bring us to the information from the National Hurricane Center, because we're yet to read it out so far, so we're shortchanging people at the minute. But I can tell you the National Hurricane Center's advisory, 80-mile-an-hour winds, obviously, a pressure of 997 millibars, they're saying. A hurricane warning remains in effect for Vieques and Culebra, the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands, a hurricane watch for Puerto Rico, and a tropical storm warning for Puerto Rico. Key messages displayed on the screen here. Dangerous winds will continue in those regions during the next few hours. Heavy rainfall over portions of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands could produce flash flooding through Thursday morning, and there are some flash flood warnings out there right now. The risk of dangerous storm surge and hurricane force winds later this week and this weekend continues to increase in the central and northwestern Bahamas and along the Florida east coast, although it is still too soon to determine where these hazards will occur. Residents in these areas should ensure they have their hurricane plan in place and not focus on the exact forecast track of Dorian's center. Heavy rains are expected to occur over portions of the Bahamas, Florida, and elsewhere in the southeastern United States later this week into early next week. Rainfall estimates from this point forward: the northern Leeward Islands 1 to 3 inches further, the eastern part of Puerto Rico and the US and British Virgin Islands 4 to 6 inches, western Puerto Rico and the central and northwestern Bahamas 2 to 4 inches, isolated 6, the coastal sections of southeast United States 4 to 8 inches, isolated 10 is what they're calling for at the moment. I don't think they're mentioning in numbers storm surge yet, but I imagine if it's going to be taking a beeline right angle landfall into Florida, it's going to be pretty high. That is still 4 or 5 days away.
Yeah.
Now let's see if we can get back onto some satellite imagery that we can show you. Might take a little while to load here, but somewhere over there, Dorian will appear shortly. Yeah, that's taking some time. Well, if there's any comments or questions, let's take some now. There were a lot that came in not so very long ago, so let's see if we can take some right now. A lot of people saying hello, actually. Hi. What is... Okay, we had that question. We had that answered earlier, the chance of becoming a Category 5. I can tell you it is vanishingly small. What else do we have here? Is this kind of like a Hurricane Jean? Any input on that?
I do not know.
Oh. Well, I don't think it's going to do a loop out there in the Western Atlantic before striking Florida, so that sets it apart already. But apart from that, I suppose it's a little bit, I guess. Yeah, I suppose that, yeah, a few similarities.
Yeah.
Dora being an analog being mentioned as well. So those two are probably the best, one of the better analogs. But this one, I mean, there aren't many analogs to choose from, so by definition, they aren't really particularly good ones.
Yes.
What's the probability of Dorian crossing into the Gulf of Mexico? It must be around half chance.
According to long-term models, that trend could be increasing, though, to a potentially higher number. There still are a good chunk of models that kind of just pushed into Florida and then up into the southeast.
Yeah.
But there has been a shift within the past 24 to 36 hours to more models indicating that it will cross over the flatlands of the Florida Panhandle and then into the Gulf of Mexico. And then from that point, it's too early, really, to say where the storm can make landfall from there. There is some consensus at the 6-day mark from a large chunk of the models that it could go into the Gulf of Mexico. I think the only major exception among parent models at this point is actually the GFS that pushes it into northern Florida, the Jacksonville area, and then up into Georgia and the rest of the southeast. Even the HMON, which keeps it as an extremely weak storm, so that the whole thing actually initializes it weaker than it currently is right now, has it crossed the Panhandle into the Gulf of Mexico. So keeping an eye on this to see how it develops, because right now, if you were to extrapolate the National Hurricane Center forecast, you'd assume they have it going into the Gulf of Mexico if we were to go 24 hours into the future. So we have to keep an eye on that very closely, because just after this hits mainland of the Panhandle, it doesn't necessarily mean that the threat from Dorian is over, because for all we know, we could be tracking it for another 2 to 3 days after that as it becomes a dangerous storm for another area. Hopefully that doesn't happen, of course, but the model consensus is increasingly shifting towards that being a dangerous possibility.
And a little bit later on, Strat, maybe we could have a look at those model runs.
Yeah, and just another thing, I saw someone messaging in our Discord chat. There is a Recon mission going into Dorian right now. It's not. It looks like it's going to be a low-level Recon, actually heading out from Barbados into it. So it looks like it's about to reach the outer edge of the storm. So probably by the end of the hour, we'll start to get the first amount of significant information that we'll need about Dorian, at least the newest information that we can get.
We got another question there about any possible effects in South Carolina.
Too early to say.
What I would say is that with models calling for a recurve either before or after the Florida landfall, I would say that puts South Carolina with a pretty good chance of getting storm conditions somewhere. But that is well beyond 5 days. That's at least 7 days, probably.
Yeah. The current 5-day forecast for tropical storm force winds from the National Hurricane Center puts parts of southern South Carolina in between the 10 to 20% range of tropical storm force winds. Georgia is when you start to get towards 30 and 40, and then Florida is kind of the bullseye right now. This is still, even though Florida was potentially in the eyes of it yesterday, this is something to know in particular, a massive shift for the Bahamas, where Nassau, the Bahamas capital, was potentially expecting intense tropical storm force conditions yesterday. Now it looks like it could potentially completely avoid it if the storm were to remain its current size or get much less significant impacts in general from the storm.
What is the chance of rapid intensification for Dorian is a question we've just received here.
Do we know what the ship says?
I do not know.
I will bring up the
Whilst
ship's,
we wait to see what one of the computer models says, again, I'll just reiterate there that the National Hurricane Center aren't expecting rapid intensification, but I think they're just really hedging their bets on maybe there might be an IWOL replacement cycle. But rapid intensification, I think, is possible anywhere along its course before it reaches Florida right now. It could happen at any time. Sea surface temperatures across the board are very warm, 28 or 29 degrees Celsius. Wind shear is fairly low, I think. What has really been putting the handbrake on Dorian is lack of water vapor and moisture. Dry air has been rather dominant in the vicinity. And generally wind shear hasn't been too bad for it. And if it hadn't been for that dry air, you would have seen a much quicker intensification through the Eastern Caribbean, and, well, you might have had visions of 2017 there, but thankfully not so.
I think from what I've seen from some soundings, there's still some mid-level dry air involved with Dorian at the moment, but as it kind of continues to move north, that should become less and less of a factor as it continues to develop a stronger outflow for itself, which in the satellite imagery on the stream, we're already seeing, at least on the north side and a bit of the east side, develop pretty nicely. Once Puerto Rico's all in the clear of it and the south side develops more, drier should become much less of a factor in terms of hindering and strengthening of the system. I guess that's why the National Hurricane Center's upped their forecast so drastically, other than just the land attraction not really happening the same way.
David, are you with us right now? I don't know if he is.
His mic is mute. His mic is currently muted.
Yes, I'm here, Nathan.
No longer. You're running our Facebook stream tonight.
Yes.
Anything on there that we need to look at?
Nothing at this point in time.
Well, just for your information, we are streaming on Facebook, so if you have any Facebook friends who might benefit from our coverage tonight, please let them know. In the meantime, more questions about... Zach says that he's flying to Orlando on the 1st of September, and will Dorian affect the flight? I would probably say yes at the minute, because the storm will arrive... Well, you know, we can't be completely... sure just yet, but we think the storm will arrive late on the 31st.
I think it's gonna arrive later than that. I've seen models say it's gonna arrive on Monday.
Monday.
Sunday is is September 1st.
Yes.
So it looks like late in the day September 1st into early to midday September 2nd. A whole 24 to 36 hour time from there is when the storm will be actually crossing over land. But from the start of September 1st to the start of September 3rd is probably when you're going to be, at least for the Panhandle itself, seeing the most severe impacts at this point in time. 2 p.m. on Sunday, September 1st, it's just a bit offshore moving west. 2 p.m. Monday, it's literally over the middle of the Panhandle. Or not the Panhandle, the peninsula. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But you'll see in between the 4 and 5 day time frame, that's still not a huge chunk of movement, maybe a couple 100 miles at most. And considering the potential size of the storm, there will easily be significant disruption around the Orlando area at that time period.
Yeah.
And Nathan, I just wanted to follow on from what Strat said, and I will be monitoring the Twitter feed. We have developing news item from, I think it might be the Florida, from the Martin County.
The state of emergency, is it? Or something else?
School district. All school and district related activities, including athletics, will be cancelled for the period, time period of Saturday, August the 31st, Monday, September the 2nd, and additional updates will be posted.
Interestingly, September 2nd this year is Labor Day. obviously, in the United States. So it is a national holiday, which means that people will be on vacation.
Yeah, let's hope they look at the weather
Regardless.
forecast.
Yeah, major disruptions for travel plans are almost certain to occur. Yeah, this time of year, people are like, oh, it's Labor Day, and we're gonna go down south to
Remember
beach
that
maybe
Labor
for a
Day
weekend,
hurricane,
have a good
guys?
time.
Yeah.
No, we don't actually. It's too long ago.
I know. I was
Way
joking.
too long ago.
I was joking.
But people are thinking, come down south, have a nice weekend, extended weekend with the family. This is going to throw a monkey wrench in those plans, to say the least. At least for the peninsula. I don't know. I think one of the current forecasts calls for this to go straight over Disney World as a significant hurricane, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That's
extreme
very
disruptions for a place that has tens and thousands of visitors and tourists every day. Before you even consider the more long-term effects for the Panhandle itself, if it moves back into the Gulf of Mexico, or
still the U.S. East Coast, Stephen.
Yeah. Still too early to say from past 5 days out, but Florida's definitely in the crosshairs right now, and uncertainty at least has us monitoring from the southeast of the states for potential heavy rainfall and flooding impacts all the way through large portions of the rest of the Gulf Coast to see what happens if this unexpectedly continues to track further and further west on the long-term forecasts.
I believe there was a request about the rapid intensification chances.
Can you hear me?
Yes, the ship's model.
Huh?
The ship's model?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, so for ship's probabilities of rapid intensification for 20 knots in 12 hours, the threshold is 28%. Which is 5.3 times above the climatological mean.
So that is a 28% chance of the storm being 105 miles an hour in 12 hours.
Now, for 25 knots in 24 hours, rapid intensification threshold is 47%.
So almost a half chance that the storm will be 105 miles an hour this time tomorrow, according to the model.
And ship's probability for 30 knots in 24 hours, rapid intensification threshold is 36%.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Ship's probability
so for major hurricane in 1.5 days, a fair chance.
And the ship's probability for rapid intensification in 35 knots in 24 hours is 33%.
So a third of a chance of the storm being 120 miles an hour in, what was that, 36 hours?
24.
24 hours, wow. And that really could happen, to be honest. Not to say that it will, but the way this storm has been going on the satellite imagery, actually, let's just cut back to that satellite imagery now. Here is the eye. It's really starting to come out in latest frames, and a blow up to towards the north. Southern side still looking a bit lacking, but this thing is really getting going right now. Raw SATID values earlier, our way of interpolating the satellite data, had 93 miles per hour. That has to stay for quite a few hours before we run with that number, but it is really heading towards that direction looking at this satellite imagery right now, because the eye temperature is increasing and the cloud tops are still blowing up, actually even more than they were before.
Yeah, and to continue on, the ship's probability for rapid intensification for 40 knots in 24 hours is 29%. For 45 knots in 36 hours, it is 32%. And for 55 knots in 48 hours, it's 31%. And for 65 knots in 72 hours, it is 22%.
Alright, we're going to take a short break here. We'll be back in just a moment or two to talk more about Dorian. We're not going anywhere. Stay with us. This is Force 13 Live. Force 13 Live, tracking Hurricane Dorian. If you've just joined us and haven't been around for a while, Dorian reached hurricane status a few hours ago as it was moving through the Virgin Islands. One of those islands, I can't remember which one now, really got the brunt of the storm. Can anyone tell me which island that was again?
I think that was the British Virgin Islands?
No, it was one of the US Virgin Islands, I believe.
Oh, really?
I'm not sure if it was St. Croix or not.
Might have been. Possibly the main island, actually. Anyway, it is moving on through. I'm trying to get the most recent imagery on here, but let's go back to the other imagery now, which is actually, this is developing at light speed. This is the latest on Hurricane Dorian right now. This imagery is, the last image on this frame is only 3 minutes old, and the eye temperature continues to increase every minute. This is developing quite rapidly, I think, right now.
Yeah, that eye looks to be clearing out pretty quickly at this point in time. I think, what is it? I don't have the scale out for me directly, but I think that eye temperature is approaching the negative single digits at this point in time, or is it still in the negative double digits?
I think it's still quite clearly in the double digits, actually. I'll get
negative 20s?
I'll get a readout for you in a moment. In the meantime, we'll scoot back to that imagery whilst we figure out what's going on with that. Daylight is fading over the area, and the eye temperature is minus 18. So it's still in double digits, but yes, the eye temperature is now minus 18 Celsius. Just 25 minutes ago, the eye temperature was minus 33. A warmer eye temperature means a more intense eye, and with the cloud tops to match, that means a much stronger storm if it continues in this way, with that eye temperature increasing from minus 33 to minus 18 in 25 minutes.
Yeah, someone in the chat has mentioned that the convection is exploding right now.
On the northern side, it is.
Although I will say it's a bit barren on the southeastern quadrant. It's kind of a bit disconnected with some of the other convection that's kind of tailed off in a tail formation.
By no means are we anywhere near talking about a complete eye wall or anything like that at this stage. But
no, totally.
This really is, from Dorian's point of view.
Actually, it's kind of disrupting it.
From Dorian's point of view, it's gone through the traps really quick. Excellent start after passing the islands. And the more I look at it, the more I'm convinced that we're seeing a significant intensification phase. Whether it's rapid or not remains to be seen.
Yeah, I don't like to look at this. If this, especially if this impacts two areas that I am fond of in Tampa, I'm really gonna be heartbroken. But it's looking to be something's gonna hit one of these two towns, whether it be Tampa or Gainesville. Or it could even hit Sarasota, or, Orlando. If it hits Orlando, that's not going to be good at all. That'll be really bad.
All right, I think we've got lots of questions that I've still not seen to just yet. They are coming in real quick. We're doing our best.
Yeah.
Do we think Dorian will be a Category 4? Well, I stated earlier that we're giving the chances right now about 15% chance of it becoming a Category 4. Those chances might take a hike up now if this trend continues, because there's another new frame out there now. Let's just see what the eye temperature is in this new frame. So it was minus 18 just a few minutes ago, minus 17 now, so it's only gone up 1. But still, it is going up at this point, and that eye is now quite distinct. Let's just get the raw visible. There it is on the raw visible. The eye is quite clear. The convection just to its north is very clear. Another convective tower just off St. Croix right now, and even further east, you can still see some convection blowing up, possibly delivering some locally heavy rainfall to St. Martin. And I forget the islands just north of there right now. It will come to me. But St. Martin is one of those.
And just for those interested in Reconnaissance, we'll update from earlier in the stream. The NOAA Mission 11 is about to enter the periphery of the storm, and there is another one taking off right now, actually, from, I don't know if you know this geographical position, but about 69 west and 12 degrees north. It looks to be an island, maybe one of the Virgin Islands. I'm not quite sure, though.
Yes. Anguilla being the other island group that is experiencing those thunderstorms right now.
Yes. And so yeah, there is if I had to say myself, I think that I mean, like, let's compare it to this morning. I think it definitely looks much more organized than this morning. This morning, like, it just looked like a mess.
It looked like a mess yesterday for sure.
Yeah.
Just for people that aren't as into the technical side of things, Nathan, could you explain how the center relocation to the south aided the storm's development?
It's pretty straightforward. If the storm had remained further south, its track would have taken it headlong into Dominican Republic, which is a very a large landmass, obviously. It's got high altitudes. It would cause a huge amount of disruption to the storm, as it has done with so many hurricanes in the past. It has taken Category 5 hurricanes down to Category 2. It's taken Category 3 and 4 down to Category 1 and possibly down to TS. In fact, was it Jean that really struggled with Hispaniola as well before it went on to strike Florida after that recovery? But
Yeah,
now that
because
it
it did
has
a loop.
moved, now that it has moved further north, it's got a much better chance. It's intensified pretty much uninterrupted as a result. It's past the land masses now that would have been great trouble to it. Puerto Rico even might have stopped it a little bit, although Irene of 2011 might want to say something about that. That storm also could be a little bit comparable to this storm, at least up to the Bahamas. That became a Category 3 through the islands, but then turned towards the north. This one is sort of going to go the opposite bend. It's going to move north first and then turn towards the west. So that's where the similarities end. And that's obviously quite a small storm as well, Dorian, as we look at this imagery from GOES 16. A wide shot, several wide shots that show the storm. I'm not sure what resolution this is. It might be 4 kilometer.
Yeah.
But you can see it there. The eye is still quite clear further out on that imagery there as well.
I would note, though, especially in the visible imagery, where it's easiest to see, that the outflow from the center of the storm, especially on the north side, has had marked improvements in the last 6 hours or so during the current loop of this. Much improvement. That's terrible grammar, but significant improvement being seen on the outflow section. Once it starts to clear Puerto Rico, that's really the last landmass that's in its way for the next several days. That should probably occur on the south side as well, which will definitely aid any potential further intensification. And I think just to go over the relocation a bit more, just for exclamations, a lot of the models yesterday were saying that Dorian would actually dissipate and reform further north once it reached closer to the Bahamas, and then potentially strike Florida at a significant intensity there. I think now that we've seen a center relocation like that, I think it'd be pretty agreed that the models were trying to indicate something like that could happen, but they weren't really being able to pick up on how such a thing could occur. The models typically struggle with that kind of thing, and that could lead to potential error in intensities and location tracks, where we've seen this shift further north than we were expecting at east. Initially, we were expecting a Hispaniola landfall. Now we've missed Puerto Rico completely. And we were also just yesterday expecting a much weaker system. Now we're seeing something that could threaten Florida as a major hurricane instead.
And until earlier today, the National Hurricane Center was on the lower end of the model intensities for a while. Now it's sort of in with them, isn't it?
Yeah, it actually flipped a bit above the average consensus. I guess they're trying to get ahead of the game to readjust just a little bit. There was a question further up in the chat.
We've got so many questions, Strat. Let's go through as many as we can right now. What are the chances? What chances are there of it passing into the Gulf of Mexico? Okay, someone is making a big deal out of something over there. The chance of it passing into the Gulf of Mexico? As said earlier, about a half chance right now.
Yep. And let's see, there's a ton of more questions as well. If you want to have your question be able to be seen by us, start your question with Force13 or at Force13, all in text. It lights up in a nice orange color for us, the message.
Very big and bright. Even David wouldn't miss that.
And it also, if you find this informative and you think people in harm's way might be able to find these useful as well, feel free to share the link around. Yeah. It's very helpful for us. Leaving a like as well also kind of helps as well. There's also a question here. You'll probably potentially know this. Hank would love this personally. Someone asked, has Dorian produced more ace than Barry so far?
I reckon it probably has, yes. Yeah, I think it will have done by now.
Too.
I don't know for sure, but I imagine that it would have done.
Hurricane season, so.
More questions. How big an actual size do you think Dorian will get? It's already grown a lot since this morning. And if it has an eyewall replacement cycle at some point, that will really make it grow a bit more. In the meantime, it's only going to be gradual growth. The National Hurricane Center thinks it will increase about 1.5 times its current size in the next 3 days. That pretty much answers that question, I suppose. Could Dorian keep intensifying all the way to the coast, similar to Michael, since it will hit the Gulf Stream before landfall? It's possible. I wouldn't say it's likely. I think it's going to be more of a stair-stepping type of intensification. We might be climbing at one stair now, where it could get to Category 2 or maybe even Category 3. And in a worst-case scenario, as one of the two models are saying, over the Gulf Stream, it could step up another stair maybe before striking Florida. I don't think it's going to be constant. What else do we have? Again, everyone... Okay, repeat questions there. Is a Katrina path possible? No.
Much further north to start out and a much different formation area.
But if Katrina does interest you at all, we did commemorate the 14th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina's approach today by uploading the track of Hurricane Katrina on our channel, so you can check that out as well. One of our animations.
I will post that in the chat as well right now.
Oh, well, there's Strat going to do that. That's not our aim tonight, though.
That's true.
Nathan,
yes.
There is a question from a Facebook viewer. What are the chances of Dorian heading up the East Coast?
Rather vague question at that point. I mean, it could move into Florida, then move back out again, move northeast, affect the Carolinas, and possibly even affect the East Coast, but I wouldn't say that beyond the Outer Banks it would be very likely at this stage. But it is extremely early. It's more than a week away if that was to play out.
Yes.
Yeah. Someone was asking what would happen if the steering current around it, the high pressure steering the storm, weakened. If you want to go for that one.
Sorry, say that again.
Someone asked in the chat, what would happen to the high pressure steering the storm weakened? I'm assuming that it just means the ridge that's going to be pushing it towards the west, towards Florida.
Yeah, well,
a pretty presumptuous thing.
I mean, the GFS earlier today was talking about the storm lingering off the coast of Florida and then moving up towards the north, maybe a landfall in South Carolina. That would probably be more likely if the ridge weakened.
Basic meteorological thing. Ridge weakens, that's pushing it west. It'll allow a weakness that could help the storm push further north and get around it.
I'm not sure which direction the models are taking that ridge in at the moment, whether it's intensifying the ridge with each run or whether it's weakening it right now. Do we know?
Well, I'd say considering that the track of the storm continues at least at the 4 to 5 day mark, getting pushed further and further west. I'm assuming that.
Well, they are closely following the CMWF model on that, which has always called for the storm to go into the Gulf.
Yeah. Although more models are picking up on that now as well. The HWRF, the HMON are on it now. The GFS is the only major model I've seen that isn't. The Icon's on it. The NavGem, I think, is on it as well. I'm not sure about the JMA, but most of the models are on board with that. I think the other thing, though, is that it went further east than they were initially forecasting in terms of the latitude pushing it to go around most of the Bahamas. It's kind of doing a loop around them rather than pushing through it like we were expecting yesterday.
All right. Go ahead.
So, I would like you to answer this one for a viewer. They asked, what are the chances that it will hit southeast Florida and southwest Florida?
I was just going to read out that question. Southeastern. Well, where does southeastern Florida begin? Actually,
I think it begins in. I would say probably Miami, maybe.
Well, we put on
that's really far south.
Florida Keys as well.
We saw on the on the graphic on the left-hand side comes up every so often showing tropical storm force wind chances. The Miami-Dade area is about 41% chance of tropical storm force conditions. As for a landfall, that would be very unlikely because then you would be talking about a mildly Katrina-esque track. But that's just not going to happen, really.
Yeah, I believe I saw someone put in chat some percentages for certain cities. The city I'm from is 80%, so Tampa is 8%.
Tampa.
Yes. Then there's Port St. Lucie, which is a 99% chance. Freeport's also 99% chance.
Is this according to the National Hurricane Center?
No, National Hurricane Center doesn't have anything like that yet.
Yeah.
That might be a viewer's opinion.
They're actually giving Tampa 62% chance for Tampa, National Hurricane Center.
Yeah, that's got to be a viewer's opinion.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it is viewers. I just read about it. I thought he said it was from the net, but he also
no, it's definitely not.
Yeah, it's definitely not. But
Fake
I
news.
do think there's a big chance it'll hit either Freeport or St. Lucie or.
Yeah, I just checked and the NavGem does actually support pushing into the Gulf of Mexico, although it's a bit further east. It has it kind of hug the western coast of the peninsula after crossing into the Gulf of Mexico around the 5.5 day mark. And just an update on reconnaissance for those that are wondering, the low-level mission into Dorian, mission 11, is approaching from the south. It's passing through the Virgin Islands just off the coast of Puerto Rico right now. So within the next 30 to 45 minutes, we'll start to get a first center pass from that. And mission 12 is also leaving center right now. I think from nearby the same location, or I think it could potentially be the Bahamas. I'm not quite sure the geography of that, but we could see some updates coming from that one pretty soon as well.
Okay, so someone else asked, I believe, the chances of it hitting North Carolina.
Chances of it impacting North Carolina?
Yeah.
Very low at the moment.
I'm also noticing a lot of the wind is kind of displaced to the northeast from what I'm seeing on
as is typical in storms.
Also, just to also add to that, what are the chances that we're going to see? What kind of a tornado event could we be seeing unfold in Dorian when it hits land?
Don't know.
Too early to tell, probably. It's highly dependent on how it evolves in the coming days. I would say the most important thing in terms of the development of the storm right now is to see how the southeastern quadrant fills out with convection once it clears away from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. That's the only real disruption we've seen with the intensification trend is if you look at terms of convection cover of the southeastern quadrant away from the eye, it's pretty weak comparatively to the other sides of the storm. Land interactions probably playing a role in that, kind of cutting off some inflow from moisture. Puerto Rico is probably playing the largest role in that. So 24 to 48 hours, once that's no longer a factor, we have to see really how that fills out. How large the storm gets and how many kind of extended bands there are will probably be the largest factor in determining what kind of tornado threat we see, but that's completely dependent on the evolution of the storm, especially in the next 3 days or so.
Another question,
I just saw a question
about the odds of a Louisiana storm. Those chances are still pretty low at the moment. Keep watching, though, because if the trend continues to develop in the way that it is, you know, you never know, there could be some sort of threat there. You'd be looking at least day 8 or 9 if it was going to strike Louisiana, so that takes us to the end of next week. So that's still quite a way away yet. Now that would be the western extreme of the possibilities, and then you've got the most eastern extreme, which is really the storm brushing the coast of Florida and then probably moving into land, or maybe doing a Matthew.
Yeah, I think the furthest east major model at this point in time is actually the GFS.
Wow.
For being able to tell, especially because the NavGem carries it into the Gulf of Mexico, unless the JMA does something markedly different. And the GFS has an approach at the same latitude as the other models, and then kind of curve up a bit towards Jacksonville, and push into the southeastern United States from there. The JMA actually also pushes it into the Gulf of Mexico, further west than some of the other models. Has it make landfall clustered around Alabama, Mississippi, Florida. So, but at the same time, that's 6 days out. The furthest we look out is 5 days.
This is a more interesting question. Do you think we could get near Category 2 on the next update? That's the National Hurricane Center update, which they'll be doing in just over 2 hours' time. That's an intermediate advisory. They don't usually do much with the intensity for that. But by the next full advisory, which is at 11 p.m. Eastern Time, what do we think? Yeah, I think they could.
They could. At the same time, the Recon planes are about to enter the storm again from multiple angles. So if they show Category 2 now, they will update that in their 8 p.m. update.
So we're going to get a lot of information about Recon in the next hour?
Almost certainly, yes.
So that's a reason to stay tuned in. There's a lot of things to look at in the next hour. We'll be breaking away in just a few minutes. Who else wanted to speak there?
Just going to say that.
Come again?
That was Dane, I
another
think.
question. Nathan from the same person and asked the question on Facebook, is Dorian taking a similar track to Michael?
David, you didn't read out that whole question. That question is pretty irrelevant.
All right. Yeah, I just thought I'd ask.
They were comparing it to a fictional hurricane, and I don't really have time for that right now.
No, I would refrain from asking any of those questions right now. Actually, in fact, because since we're dealing with already formidable threat in Hurricane Dorian.
If you want to talk about potential just hypothetical things, we do have a semi part of our Discord server, the fake news hurricane section.
Don't do it, Strat. Don't do it.
No, I'm just sharing the Discord. There's a lot of people watching right now. If you guys want to,
we do have a community online
in a more involved way. Feel free to join our Discord using the link just posted in the chat right now. There's a ton of people there that are always willing to contribute and create a helpful conversation around the topic that we're all discussing right now.
So here's what's happening with its eye at the moment. It has leveled off. About 19 degrees Celsius is the eye at the minute. So it's fluctuating a little bit. and we'll see what happens. I mean, this is an interesting chapter that we're watching. The eye wall is trying to wrap around. The northern side is looking very good at the minute, blowing up with convection. We're taking a short break here at Force 13 HQ. We'll have some more on Hurricane Dorian, another hour at least of coverage here on Force 13 Live. Who knows when we're going to end. But we'll keep you updated. Send in your questions, and we'll be here just after the top of the next hour. Continues in a moment. You can also help the project become even better by becoming a patron. You can see more information about all the benefits involved by visiting patreon.com/Force13. With a special thanks to these people for being our most valued patrons this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colors wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description. You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. This is Force 13 Live. It is 10 p.m. UTC. That is 6 p.m. on the US East Coast and in the Caribbean. There's a look at what the warnings are. You just saw that go by on the screen there. This is Force 13 Live, our second hour of coverage on Hurricane Dorian, which was given hurricane status about 4 hours ago now. And is intensifying with winds of 80 miles an hour and our estimate earlier of 996 millibars. I'm hearing through a grapevine that the pressure might be lower now. Have Recon got something?
Yeah, I've got the latest Recon pass. It was a south to north pass on screen share right now.
Yep.
So it didn't get the strongest wind quadrant, but showing, still significant tropical storm force winds from the direct south to the direct north. We'll probably find in an hour or so, at least from this specific plane, what we're seeing on the strongest quadrant in terms of wind speed. But the lowest flight level pressure, at least from this pass, although it could potentially be lower just because it doesn't look like it was the best center fix on this one, particularly just looking at the wind speed through it, was 993.1 millibars. So it pretty much enforces our the prior last hour 996 millibar fix that we had on the storm.
Oh.
If the intensification that was an interesting sound. If the intensification trend continues, though, and we continue to see satellite improvement, the next center fix may come along, and if they get a bit of a better drop on it, we could see a pressure and potentially 1 millibar plus lower than that, although it's too early to tell at this point in time. I think what we're all itching to see, though, is the southwest to northeast pass that hopefully comes in the next hour or so we can get a more direct estimate of the actual strength of the storm as a whole.
Hopefully we'll get that very soon.
Yeah.
Did someone want to say something there?
All
right, let me reintroduce everyone first, one by one. We're joined by a few people. We've not spoken to everyone just yet, so let's introduce Ethan to the show right now. Ethan, hello.
Hello, Nathan. How are you doing?
We're great. Obviously, trying to keep on top of Hurricane Dorian. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm trying to keep on top of it as well. I have family in the path on both the east and west coast of Florida, and according to the HWRF model, they might even get the eye, both sides of the coast.
Where was that again?
I'm watching very closely. I have one family in Tampa, and I have one family also in Daytona Beach.
Wow, yeah, Daytona Beach at the minute is one of the places that is earmarked for a potential landfall. Of course, it could sweep anywhere north or south of there. Caught in the crosshairs at the minute on certainly what I've seen on the model consensus. Looking at the eye right now, you can see it came out earlier and now it looks like it's going back in again. Massive convection blowing up on the northern side. I don't think David's with us right now. We're joined as well by Dane. Hello.
Hi, Dane.
And I'm here.
Oh, David's also here. Yuxinada, you're in Florida, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
So you're watching this very closely. Anything you'd like to remark on with the development in the last few minutes?
So basically, the city I'm from has a big chance of getting hit. Because obviously, Central Florida is where I'm from, and well, Tampa is basically in the crosshairs, or looks to be in the crosshairs, but also could go to the other city I live in, partially, Gainesville, which would also be really bad.
Yes.
But, both areas, Tampa, it could hit either above Tampa or below Tampa, so it's gonna be dependent on how this storm looks, and I did have something else I wanted to say, but I completely forgot what it was.
Okay, well, if it comes back to you, let us know. We're also joined by Orlando, the person, not the city. Hello, Orlando.
Hello.
Anything you'd like to make a point on right now?
Well, right now, of course, with the reconnaissance mission going through Dorian right now, I believe that it's fair to say that the storm is continuing to intensify, of course, with the increasing level of convection, especially on the northern side of the core. Beyond that, as it seems right now, Florida remains as threat or impacts, unfortunately, within the 5-day period.
Sam is also here. Hello.
Hello.
You're joining as well from Chicago. Are you still in Chicago?
Yes.
Have you moved now?
No, I'm still in the Chicago area, and I'll be moving downtown. I'll actually be moving downtown Chicago, around the time Dorian hits Florida.
I see. Strat, obviously you heard his voice quite a lot in the last hour. I'm sure we'll hear it a lot more. And we're also joined by Justin. Hello.
Oh, hello, Nathan.
Any thoughts that you'd like to provide? Because it's the first time we've heard you here tonight.
Well, I've noticed that Dorian has, over the past few hours, is starting to develop its eye, which means I'm sort of preparing for Dorian strengthening more than the official forecast shows. And I just want to point out that I have a family member who lives in Melbourne, Florida. So if the storm continues on this present forecast track, then he could possibly be in for quite of an impact.
All right. And you can see how much that convection's really blowing up right now on the northern side of the storm. In fact, it is even greater now than it was before. There's some minus 80 cloud tops starting to appear now. That's the pink area that you can see right at the middle of the big blow up there to the north of the storm. Now, for those who are unfamiliar, those colder cloud tops, obviously they're from higher clouds, and that means there is more moisture below and usually indicates a big sign of strengthening. Of course, the more the eye deepens as well, that means an eye, because the satellites can't see through the clouds, they get the temperature of the cloud tops. So if you can see the eye, then the cloud temperature is much higher, and if you can see straight through the eye down to the ground, in other words to the sea, in other words a very, very deep eye, then obviously the eye temperature will be very warm from the satellite estimate. On the eastern side there is still a little bit of a gap there, the southeastern side not looking so great, but elsewhere it is starting to look pretty good. The eye's starting to fade underneath that cloud again, but that's not to say that it isn't there or that it's weakening. It is still very much there, and the eye wall structure could still be increasing. Would have to get microwave imagery to find out for sure. I think we're getting reverb from David right now. Sorry about that.
Latest millibar reading is... I hate to break in, but
yeah, sure.
Current millibar reading is about 993, according to drop sonde. Splash wind of 22 knots.
We're looking at radar imagery now.
Yeah. Now, okay, so, something else. I now remember what I was going to say originally. I said that this was a tangent because I completely forgot what I was going to say. But, either way, I think that, from this hurricane, like, side effects, like, what this hurricane will bring, I think it could bring devastating flooding. Because recently, there's been a lot of rain, especially, like, in Central Florida recently. So, like, for example, earlier today, it was raining really hard. And I think that this hurricane, I think it will do a lot of damage and through flooding and storm surge. Like, this, honestly, like, because I just remembered it, just wanted to give everyone a heads up about
that. Ethan's showing us some radar imagery. Would you like to talk us through it?
Yep, I sure can. You can see earlier today, this was around at 20 UTC, so this is around 4 p.m. Eastern time. The eye was existing, but it wasn't really that well defined, and ever since, the eye has significantly... That is going the wrong way. The eye has significantly got it in its act together, and not even argue, it's 85 miles per hour.
You're thinking 85
There's
miles
still
an hour?
a little bit of... Yep, it's just a matter of time. We're just seeing what Recon finds, though, to make sure that my estimate is okay. But you can see on the eastern side of the storm, between that banding and the actual storm's core, there's a lot of dry air and as such, a little bit of dry air is probably getting into the center of the storm at this point. And if Dorian wants to reach a significant intensity, it has to flush all that dry air, which might take a little while.
Again, now let's just look at the raw visible imagery, because I just want to show you just how impressive it's looking on the raw visible, that massive cloud top that's blowing up. This is almost how you would see it in the real world. Of course it would be a little bit colored in. We can actually get the true color imagery. Let's see if we can get that just for a moment. Well, there is the visible nonetheless. That's just for aesthetic appearance there. But there we are, and you can still see that little depression there to its south, which of course is the eye. Isn't very clear on visible imagery, but the infrared is showing it rather well. Alright, we haven't talked about what the very latest is from the National Hurricane Center for a while, so let's just scroll back through here and read out the key messages again for those who may have missed it. Dangerous winds will continue in the Virgin Islands, Culebra, Vieques and portions of Puerto Rico during the next few hours. Heavy rainfall over portions of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands could produce flash flooding through Thursday morning. To remind you of the warnings that are still in effect, a hurricane warning for Vieques and Culebra, US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands, a hurricane watch for Puerto Rico, and also a tropical storm warning for Puerto Rico. The risk of dangerous storm surge and hurricane force winds later this week and this weekend continues to increase in the central and northwestern Bahamas and along the Florida east coast, although it is too soon to determine where these hazards will occur. Residents in these areas should ensure they have their hurricane plan in place and not focus on the exact forecast track of Dorian's center. That last point is quite important. Heavy rains are expected to occur over portions of the Bahamas, Florida, and elsewhere in the southeastern United States later this week and into early next week. Just a reminder that the forecast cone from the National Hurricane Center, the center of the storm could pass anywhere within that cone. So definitely be mindful of that. We could still see the center of the hurricane clip the southern tip of the Florida mainland, or make landfall in Georgia. So there could be anything from this storm yet. Still quite far way out, 5.5 days. Forecasts have gotten better over the years, but we still could not tell you exactly which part of Florida will get the worst of this storm.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring up something notable from earlier, not just a few minutes ago actually. Someone said the drop zone that went into the center of the storm at the surface recorded 993 millibars, which shows that it is actually more intense than what we could have initially just presumed based on the Recon air pressure of the flight low of 993.1. It looks like we can get a perfect center fix, at least on that one, from the lowest point we got. But 993 is stronger than we were seeing at the start of the hour, last hour at least. So it shows the intensification trend is continuing at this point in time at minimum. We're going to definitely be keeping track on that recon plane as it either turns to the right here to do a northeast to southwest center fix, or if it goes left to do a northwest to southeast center.
Are you supposed to be showing us this strat?
No, I was just mentioning some of the latest information that we got from the recon. Something we haven't done really yet that I was wondering if you wanted to do, if we had some availability, was show some of the computer models. I know we've mentioned them a bit when we started to talk a bit more about the long-range forecast for this once we're getting towards Florida, but we haven't really showed them all at all yet.
Well, here are some models on the screen right now, and you can see the model trends there. Some of them calling for a little bit more of a pronounced bend within the next 48 hours than others. Whether that will be significant or not remains to be seen. Some of the statistical models going very wayward, way off towards the north. I wouldn't put much faith into those at all. That's the TABM, TCLP, and CLP5. No. The other ones are the ones you should be looking at, and it's quite interesting actually that there isn't any of the models on this screen that have the storm making landfall south of Jupiter.
Yeah, that is very interesting. It kind of shows the statistical models, and the only ones out of those three, what is it, the TABM, TCLP, and the CLIP5 that veered off to the north. The rest of them, all of them, show a Florida landfall at minimum. Most of them that go slightly beyond 5 days, or even ones that bring it a bit quicker, push it into the Gulf of Mexico.
And here are the intensity models.
Which is very useful.
Now,
yeah, you can talk about those
too. Any of the model names here that end in the letter I are interpolated models based on the last 6 hours. So they're usually less accurate, especially that one that wants it to be a Category 5. So just disregard that one, and then you've got all the others, and it's pretty good agreement that it is going to reach Category 3 status at some point. Is what we can deduce from this.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned this once earlier, but it is important to mention again that a potentially severe impact from the system, if it actually becomes a strong hurricane, at least before it makes landfall, if it becomes Category 3 hurricane and increases in size significantly from its current point, even if it weakens a bit before landfall, so then a watch that could be vital is storm surge. Because this is coming in towards Florida at an angle that has been seldom seen before, from a location that's been seldom seen.
That's all I can really think of right now when I see that angle of attack is the storm surge.
Yep, because cyclones in the northern hemisphere rotate counterclockwise. So north of the storm, you'll see motions from the east to west, which is the way the storm's moving. So north of the center of the storm is where the worst storm surge will be. And this part of Florida, typically, just based on normal cyclone tracks, very rarely sees storm surge of any kind, at least significantly. Of course, there's storms that may break some sign, like Matthew came up offshore and definitely brought some impacts, but it didn't make landfall, didn't come into land and brought the worst storm surge on shore with it. That is something we could potentially see if this track maintains itself, especially if it takes a harsher left turn and goes straight in rather than at least some sort of an angle. These areas, and it's also relatively low-lying areas as well. Most of Florida is pretty flat. You know, you see, especially some southern Florida gets tidal flooding because of rising sea levels. Particularly not really the areas which impacts.
We're losing your strat.
Aren't typically very well prepared for such a situation. So, pretty much one of the close things we should be watching in terms of development of the system is how intense it gets and how large it gets, because storm surge for vulnerable communities that aren't used to it could be very severe and damaging, to say the least.
Absolutely. I just want to bring people's attention just briefly to the other systems that are active around the world. Tropical storm Podul is going to pass just south of Hainan, China, in the next 24 hours before weakening to a tropical depression and striking Vietnam. It could produce huge amounts of rain for Vietnam and Laos, possibly up to 450 millimeters. That's 8 inches. Yes, it is 8 inches. No, it's more than that. Is it? Yes. 18 inches. 18 inches possible. And that is the intensity model. Is that up? No, that's an old one. Ignore that one. This is the graphical tropical weather outlook from the National Hurricane Center, showing that tropical depression Erin is hopelessly exposed and is traversing towards the northeast right now. Could become an extratropical storm for Nova Scotia, but we're no longer expecting any tropical impacts anywhere. Dorian is quite easy to spot there too on the imagery. In the Eastern Pacific, nothing's happening, and in the Central Pacific, equally little amount is happening there too. In the Western Pacific, things fairly quiet, apart from Podul as well, but there could be some new activity in the Western Pacific next week. After that brief update, very brief indeed, we're back to the main feature, which is Dorian, and here's some imagery right now that we can look at, whilst I give the floor back to someone else, if they want it. Or perhaps
sure,
not.
I guess I'll take it, Nathan. On
Sure.
my screen, I have the most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds, and the National Hurricane Center is highlighting that the most likely time for arrival for the tropical storm force winds on the west coast of the east coast of Florida will be at Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Bear in mind that Eastern Time does share the same time as Atlantic Standard. And 8 p.m. for the West Coast.
Yep, and those of you who are beyond the west coast of Florida, so the Panhandle or states nearby, you'll have to wait a little bit longer to figure out maybe when the storm might arrive, and the track could change a lot in that time too.
Yeah.
If you've got any comments or questions for us, you can send them in right now. Start your message with Force 13 all in text. They will appear on our YouTube chat if you're watching us there, and on Facebook as well. You can send a message and we'll hopefully get back to you if we don't get completely swamped. Obviously, it is a very big subject right now. There is a lot of areas at risk. Of course, that state of emergency was declared just over an hour ago. We heard about it at least. So
Yes.
a lot of people.
Yes, I'd also like to add that we are starting to see some public information statements by local National Weather Service forecast offices in across Florida. They're soon to be releasing them rather early, as the forecast track for one is uncertain, and for another reason that this storm has a lot of potential to intensify rather quickly. Looking at a lot of radar imagery, seeing those hot towers blowing up in some of the areas could be signs of rapid intensification, and especially after seeing those public information statements, it's starting to become more crucial for those in Florida to start preparing now for the onset of the storm.
We'll bring you back up to date with the real-time imagery shortly. I can tell you that the convection is continuing to massively blow up right now and is pretty much engulfing the eye. So what is actually happening underneath, we really don't fully know, and hopefully Recon can find out for us. Strat, any updates?
Nothing particular in terms of direct updates, but we can actually kind of get a bit of look at what the eye is looking like if we're using radar imagery.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone has some direct ones, but the eye is looking pretty impressive on radar imagery that I'm seeing, at least in our Discord chat. The southwest quadrant is a bit weaker compared to the rest, but we're starting to see a pretty solid eye wall pop up, which could be very dangerous heading in to the next 24 hours or so. Especially since we're seeing this massive convection blow up right now. If the radar eye appearance continues to maintain itself and improve, that means once the eye clears out again, we could be looking at a much more significant intensification trend.
Well, there is at least a still image of that radar there, and you can again see how the northern side is very strong indeed, and again how the eye itself, the eye wall is... You can clearly see where the gaps are. It's on the southeastern side, possibly another one on the southwestern side, but it's got at least half an eye wall now.
Yeah.
Questions then. What are our thoughts on the storm striking the Miami metropolitan area? It would be a worst case scenario. Well, as I said earlier, we're giving Miami a 41% chance of tropical storm conditions. It would be very unlikely that it would get hurricane conditions, I should think, much less a landfall. It is almost certain that this storm will pass several dozens or maybe even hundreds of miles to the north. A very vague question there. What are our predictions for Dorian? Well, there's the National Hurricane Center's track map on our screen right now, if that helps you. We're not deviating very much from what they're saying, really. Are we seeing impact in Fort Myers is a question that we get there as well. Any takers on that?
I know where Fort Myers is. It's sort of in the south Florida. Obviously, I think that Fort Myers has a pretty big chance of getting impacted. I would expect tropical storm force winds at the very least. I don't know if I'd expect hurricane winds, though. Like, it's still too early to tell for that.
Fort Myers, 33% chance of tropical storm conditions right now, according to our numbers at least. What are the chances of Dorian going into the Gulf? We've had that question several times. Everyone wants to know. It is an important question. We get it. And again, I would still say it's about a half chance. And those odds are increasing over time.
Yeah, the 18Z GFS run should be trickling out now. It's actually past the 120-hour points. We can actually take a look and see what it does.
Yeah.
Remember, as a 12Z, the GFS was the only major model outlier of the parent model not taking it into the Gulf of Mexico, and instead having it move into northeastern Florida and push into the southeastern United States that way. I'm taking a look, letting the model render right now, and it still does the same thing. GFS is still the only model that takes it directly into the southeast without crossing into the Gulf of Mexico at the moment.
Yeah.
We'll get...
It's at the exact same location. It's not changed at all. GFS is staying very consistent with this at the moment.
Here is the last visible imagery of the day. So night falling now over Hurricane Dorian, and still those cloud tops are blowing up hugely on the northern side. It is really going right now.
Yes, it's
Are we
also
seeing negative 80s there at this point in time? We probably are, right?
We had it briefly. I'm not sure if it is the case now. For some reason, the infrared is only showing very partially right now.
Because even on satellite imagery, just on visible, you see a massive blow up there. And someone's asking a question while you look at that. Someone's asking, are hurricanes made up of supercells and multicells? I think the pretty clear answer to that is no.
Yeah, that's true in most of that case. There can be some embedded supercells within hurricanes.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but sometimes, and those are typically those would usually occur around overlands. Those are the ones that can produce tornadoes, and those are typically found in the northeast quadrant. But they don't produce any large tornadoes like you'd see in Tornado Alley. Maximum EF2.
Yeah, nothing too severe.
Usually. Some hurricanes can produce a lot of tornadoes.
Yeah, we've seen
but
that.
Usually, they top out like EF2.
Yeah, we've seen that with Irma, and we've seen that with Michael, from what I can recall.
More questions. Another very common question. Do you think Dorian will become a Category 4? Well, every few minutes at the bottom of the screen, we show our chances of reaching each category. We're still got it at 15% at the moment. Does Dorian have a chance of making landfall on the Florida East Coast? I assume that question is. Well, that's what we've been banging on about the whole time. It's looking very likely.
Every model is
yes, highly likely. I would say almost certain at this point.
I mean, it's still definitely variant. We're still a bit far out, but
yeah.
A large majority of the models show landfall on the Florida Peninsula at this point in time. I only see, other than statistical ones, only 2 that don't show a direct Florida landfall at this point in time from the East Coast.
Yeah, like there's a very low chance it could. Like, the chances of it pulling like a Hurricane Matthew like we saw in 2016 are minimal.
Mm-hmm.
Minimal, but we can't necessarily rule anything out and say,
right,
no, that's not going to happen at all. You know, we're still 5 days out. If you look at the cone of uncertainty at the 5-day time frame, it encompasses all of the Florida Peninsula and then some. At 5 days, they expect maybe it could completely miss southern Florida and go past the Keys or make landfall in Georgia, or at that time maybe it could be either stalled off the coast or in the Gulf of Mexico already. One thing's for certain, though, is that any interest in Florida, in particular in the surrounding regions, and even northern Bahamas, most of the Bahamas actually, should definitely be watching this system very closely. If you know people there or you are there yourself, you should be watching its development more closely, keeping an eye on the latest information not only from national officials and us, but local officials that can provide more important and precise information for your specific area. Any evacuation orders or precautions issued by those local officials are orders that should be heeded either immediately or to your own discretion, depending on what kind of order it is. Always listen to evacuation orders if necessary as well.
We're breaking off for a quick minute here. We're back in just a moment with more on Hurricane Dorian. Don't go away. Force 13 Live returns with more coverage of Hurricane Dorian right now, with winds of 80 miles an hour and a decreasing pressure, which is being confirmed by Recon, and I'm sure they're still round and about the storm right now. Do we have any news on that, Strat?
Let me take a real quick look, see if the second plane has made a pass.
Recon is going from northwest to southeast.
It is?
Yeah, Recon's going northwest to southeast. It's still at the northwest side on the periphery of the storm, so we're probably not going to get any new information on a center pass for at least the next 40 minutes, maybe later on.
That long? Oh, center pass, yeah. But we might get some wind information from the northeastern quadrant in 10 or 20 minutes.
No, it's coming from the northwest side, so we're not going to see direct
coming from the northwest yet. I thought you said it was doing southwest to northeast.
I was surprised. No, it's northwest to southeast.
Oh, God. The wrong sides. Okay, fine.
I was actually surprised by that. I thought they'd want a direct sample of the strongest winds right away, but I guess they've decided to go a bit of a different route than that for the time being.
Mm-hmm. Let's see if we have any more questions. What are the chances of Dorian becoming a Category 3 tomorrow? And if it's right, what are the chances it will hit Category 5? I'd still tell you that the Category 5 chances are exceedingly slim. No storm has ever formed in the Eastern Caribbean and become a Category 5 outside of the Caribbean. And whether it will be a Category 3 tomorrow, I think that is very... Well, not very likely, but I think it is somewhat likely now, looking at this.
Yep. People are just asking a couple questions again about the Gulf of Mexico. We're not going to talk about intensity in the Gulf of Mexico in particular, just because intensity is always the hardest part of forecasting for cyclones. And once you get to even that far out, it's going to be even more difficult to discuss it like that. Someone asked, what you could say an interesting question is, why are the European models being more aggressive than the GFS models? I think they're discussing in terms of its westward push that the models are starting to edge towards.
Yeah, please clarify what you mean by aggressive there.
Yeah, I think he means aggressive when he's talking about how further west each model is pushing the storm. David actually in relation has posted a very interesting graphic, if you could fold that up in the chat room, of the history time frame of the European and GFS tracks, noting how they've started to move south and west in the past day or two. I was very intrigued by that. If you could pull it up, that would be much appreciated.
I'm gonna grab a different copy of that imagery from elsewhere in a few moments, Strat. Let's now throw it back to the wind. The wind speed probabilities. This is from the National Hurricane Center, of course. They're now, I mean, our data is probably a little bit outdated now. They're actually putting nearly 80% chance of tropical storm conditions along parts of the Space Coast of Florida.
Nathan, just to the west of Florida, up there in the Gulf, National Weather Service Charleston is reporting, now this is about 30 minutes ago, coastal flooding is now taking place due to a, I'm going to say, king tide and a high tide.
Yeah. Well, thank goodness the hurricane didn't hit today then.
Yes, that would have made things considerably worse. So that was the news item from earlier.
Thanks for that. Do you have any news out of the Caribbean islands right now on what's actually happened there? Flooding was a certain issue earlier on.
Major flooding. I did see a video, but there's too much noise. There was a lot of screaming, and I'm not sure which island it was, but probably the watered up to probably nearly covering the wheels of a car. So flooding is extensive. I'm not sure how much rainfall.
All right, here's something that we're going to show on the screen now. This is the GFS model. The last, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 model runs from the GFS. You can see initially the GFS has actually moved slightly north of where it was originally saying 6 runs ago. But it has stayed in and around the same areas. So that's an interesting one from the GFS. The latest, the runs have been trending stronger pretty much each time. Still below the National Hurricane Center each time though as well. And actually the latest run there is actually predicting lower wind shear than any of the other runs so far. So that's another interesting thing about the GFS. The HWRF version, this is what that's showing. As you can see, the latest model run has the HWRF, has the storm much further south landfall in Florida than any of the previous runs actually, so that's very interesting, and whether that continues we'll see. As for intensity, it's been pretty constant all the time, calling for category 2s, 3s generally, 4s even actually, that's the category 4 bracket there, what a lot of the runs have been saying. That's because wind shear is low on most of those model runs, and the latest model run has it one of the lowest wind shears yet as well. So let's just check the HMON as well. HMON in the short term, up to 48 hours, has lower wind shear than what it was predicting previously, but in the longer term, day 2 through 5, higher wind shear than what it was originally expecting. So that's 2 out of 3 of those models that we've just picked out there, saying that wind shear will be lower than what it initially said. Also, the HMON there taking the track of Dorian right over Lake Okeechobee with that latest run as well. That's 12Z. It doesn't have 18 yet. But again, that is further south than the previous model runs too. So if it does continue trending south, do we think it's going to, the models will continue to trend south?
Nathan, I'd just like to pick up on the tracking. I did cite some information on the Twitter feed that the ridging is increasing, which means that it will, it will push the system further west.
Yeah, I do concur with David. If we're just looking at the model trends, I've kind of had a saying, I don't know, it's not really directly relevant to this, but I've, just typically a trend with some of the models that they will underestimate the Bermuda Ridge significant time frames out, and that will result in them, as the storm gets closer to impacting land, having forecast tracks shifted more west. That's kind of what we're seeing right now, is models are shifting towards showing a stronger and stronger ridge come into place that will push the storm westward. towards Florida and then potentially into the Gulf of Mexico after that. Of course, our main priority right now on watch is going to be watching how it impacts the Bahamas and Florida before we're focusing on anything in the Gulf of Mexico, of course. But seeing the trend continue to shift west does raise alarm bells for what we could see in the future. And if that maintains itself within 48 hours, then we can have a much more serious conversation about it.
Yes. I just want to jump in here. Basically, the main steering factors for Dorian right now are a low pressure system, upper level low, centered around south around Cuba, and you also have an upper ridge that's developing northeast of Florida, situated in the middle of the Western Atlantic. Now, really the steering for Dorian is really going to depend on how strong those other two systems are going to be out. Mainly more so with the upper level ridge, because that's kind of preventing the storm from going out to sea.
I do want to point out there is a lot of lightning activity around the eye right now. And if I'm not mistaken, that usually signifies a rapidly intensifying hurricane, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, those find some of those more severe cells near the eye. That's usually what it signifies, and that usually means that could either mean an eye wall replacement cycle is going to happen, or the storm is going to rapidly intensify and defy the eye more clearly.
That's interesting.
Either way, it's a sign of rapid intensification for sure.
Still looking at the satellite imagery on our screen and the massive convection blowing up on the northern side, and the eye, which remains decent, although not quite as visible as it was earlier. As soon as I can get another image of that eye, a recent one, no, we won't be able to get an eye temperature reading on that. But it certainly is there. It's hidden underneath quite a bit of cloud cover now, but it definitely will come back again at some point, I'm pretty sure of that. Radar tells a better story of the storm's eye.
Latest Recon update was about 8 minutes ago, and it showed them making the turn to go into the eye from the northwest.
So they're going to get another pressure reading, hopefully, from the center of the hurricane. And obviously a lower pressure typically means a stronger storm. It's certainly a deeper storm. And that pressure has been tumbling slowly, actually, in the last few hours.
What I'm really hoping is that they pass through the eye, and then on the southeast they make a left turn, then come into the northeast quadrant so we can get the highest wind speed recording and see what the intensity is. I mean, this is certainly a stronger storm at this point.
Well, yes. It is much stronger than when we first looked at it, when we were going live nearly 2 hours ago.
So you think it's rapidly intensifying in that case?
Well, here is a question. Is Dorian rapidly intensifying right now? A lot of talk about it. There is a lot of talk about it in the weather communities right now. Well, we have a team here for a reason, so let's hear your opinions, guys.
I believe it is, because basically from the evidence that the evidence from earlier, those cloud tops that are blowing up, and especially around the center, that's really what's that's usually the sign that the storm is going to get significantly stronger, and it's been on a gradual strengthening track, but it could be more doing more so now that it's heading into a more favorable environment with less wind shear and warmer sea surface temperatures.
And no land interaction. Well, sea surface temperatures are going to be around the same, 28 degrees or maybe 29. It's never been an issue. The sea surface temperatures. Relative humidity values are the ones we really should be watching, I suppose, because they're gradually rising. That's what's been slowing down the storm. And wind shear is going to remain low at least for another 48 hours. So I do think that this is probably one of two very opportune moments for the storm's point of view to have a period of rapid intensification if it's going to do it.
If you look at frames, I think you're going to see an feature starting to pop out a little.
You're talking about what, sorry?
If you look at the satellite imagery on the stream of...
Yep.
See.
Nope, you're cutting out on us, Dane.
I think he's seeing he's trying to say that there's an eye that's starting to pop out. Or...
Well, yeah,
yes.
we did see that about an hour and a half ago, though. The eye feature is apparent. It's been very apparent on the late visible imagery there. Now that we go into nightfall, who knows what's going to happen? The convection is huge around the storm's eye. Let's see if we can get...
According to radar... Go ahead, Nathan.
I'm just going to see if we can get some more infrared imagery right now. And if you can get that radar back up for us, it'd be great to see that too.
I was about to talk about that, as a matter of fact. Well, by the look now, the western side, which was the weakest, has indeed closed off, and the dry air is probably being flushed out of there right now. And that would indeed allow Dorian to significantly intensify, and having the eye closed off now is worrying, to say the least.
Yes, it's becoming more apparent at every frame there, particularly on that radar now. Quite hard to see on your screen. I don't know if you could zoom in on that at all, but on the eastern side and around the northern side, there's a complete eye wall, maybe getting towards being complete all the way around.
Yeah.
Yep, the radar presentation continues to improve, and that's one of the most concerning things to me, because you see this massive convection plume right now over the center, and at the same time, the eye itself on radar is actually improving at the same time, which means once it comes out again on satellite appearance, we could see a much more pronounced intensification trend from that point on. That's the thing I'm most concerned about right now, is that, we were talking a bit about lightning strikes within the center of the storm through those convective bursts, which typically indicates potential rapid intensification. So seeing the eye look as impressive as it is on satellite imagery is concerning, to say the least, and downright troubling for future prospects for land areas that are in the way at worst. So in the overnight hours, monitoring this in particular, to see not only how the radar position holds, but how infrared and visible starts to look overnight is of utmost importance.
And on that radar, it looks to me as though there's one fracture, maybe two, in the eye at this point. But apart from that, it is complete. So at this point, if I can assure you that the SATID values would be much higher now as well. We could be talking about a borderline category 2 at this point.
Yeah.
That would be winds of around at least 90 miles an hour, but depending on velocity, but we don't know for sure unless we see more later information from the storm, from Recon and velocity.
Now, based upon that, just seeing the storm go south of the Virgin Islands, when it gained hurricane status there, to move almost very little and now to have winds of 85, 90 miles per hour, that's got to be rapid intensification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what we'll have in the next official update on the NHC. Next update should be out by 8 o'clock Eastern time.
Yep, that's an intermediate advisory coming up in just over an hour. And we'll be here. Well, we might be here for that. I'm not sure whether we're going off the air yet or not. I don't think we are. I think we're going to stay for the next hour here, at least. And who knows? We completely play these streams by ear because quite often we feel as though, well, we're not really needed so much, so we just revert back to normal updates. But we're going to stay on the air at least for the next hour, and who knows what might happen, because it does appear as though this storm is changing all the time. And even though the threat to land, immediate threat to land, is decreasing, moving away from those islands right now, obviously it's something that we really need to be watching. And a lot of people out there are watching minute by minute to see exactly what Dorian does. Let's see if we can get that satellite imagery back. Nope, not yet. We'll come back to that. Back to the National Hurricane Center track map. If you haven't seen it, it looks like this. And there you can see they expect a major hurricane by Saturday, and to remain a major hurricane category 3 until landfall in Florida.
Yeah, and just because the average watch time is 9 minutes and 30 seconds, just about. Do we want to go over some of the warnings in place again?
Statistician strat right there.
Well, I'm just saying, because that means there's a whole new throng of over 200 people that are probably watching the stream right now. So going over the current warnings and also the state of emergencies in place for Florida already, especially for those that may be in harm's way, is very important so that they can get the latest information on what could be happening in their area in the near future.
What, you want me to do that? I thought you were going to do that.
Oh, I don't know. I thought you had some of them up already, so I was just gonna implore that we discuss this as well.
There are state of emergency. The state of emergency was issued for Florida not so very long ago. So a hurricane warning in effect for Vieques and Culebra, the US Virgin Islands and the British Virgin Islands still under those hurricane warnings. A hurricane watch for Puerto Rico, a tropical storm warning also for Puerto Rico. That's the warnings. Quite simple, really. And the reason why the Bahamas haven't been given any warnings yet is because, you know, I mean, if you saw us 2 days ago, maybe we might have been talking about how there could be warnings there soon, because that was before the storm relocated further north and the track's gone further north away from the southern Bahamas. They won't really be affected. The northernmost Bahamas will, but that's not going to be until Saturday. That's outside of 3 days, so they won't be issuing any watches for it yet. But you can be very sure that hurricane watches will be popping up there maybe tomorrow night.
Yeah, and what's actually fortunate for the Bahamas, although unfortunate for most other places with the development of Dorian, I mean, it's fortunate for Hispaniola as well, is that the center refix and this now potentially much more intense cyclone, the path change has actually made it completely avoid Hispaniola for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we were talking initially some models taking it to Haiti. That would have been a complete disaster.
It would have been a complete disaster for them. But now not only is it missed there, Dominican Republic and Haiti, for those that don't know, and Turks and Caicos in the southern parts of the Bahamas will likely be rough surf. Once we get towards the central Bahamas, though, we could see some more severe impacts in terms of wind and rain, along with storm surge and such. But compared to the previous track less than 36 hours ago, where it had the storm going straight through Nassau, which is the most populated part of the Bahamas, a much more, I guess you could say, grateful prospect for the area. Although Florida and parts of the southeast, things are quickly degrading in outlook at this point in time. I'm just going to take a quick look and see if we got any recon updates as well.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Because we have been keeping track on that. I know we talked about the radar a bit. Some people in Discord chat were giving me some nice tips just to mention. It looks like that the eye wall is actually trying to fight off the dry air protrusions that were trying to fight into it, which of course is very bad news in terms of potential intensification that we could be seeing. Taking a look at Recon really quick, just waiting for these images to load up. Within the next 20 to 30 minutes, we are going to get a northwest to southeast center pass. The Hunter is flying in right now. We're going to get information on that in the near future. From that point on, they're probably going to do a northward turn or a westward turn to go from either northeast to southwest or southwest to northeast. So by the next 80 minutes from now, we will likely have a accurate repertoire on the current intensity of the system. There are murmurs in the chats that they're saying it's a category 2. I'm not quite sure about that yet. It would have to still intensify 15 miles an hour from the last check for it to actually get to that point. But if we're getting anything from the convective bursts over the center of the storm and the radar appearance, intensification is definitely ongoing at this point in time.
Those of you keeping an eye on the mileage, it is now 39 miles from Culebra, moving away. Of course, you may have just seen we bumped up our chances for certain categories as well. We'll get onto that in the next hour. This is Force 13 Live. We'll be back again shortly in just a few minutes. We're just going to gather our thoughts again, and we will return just at the top of the next hour. Won't be long. This is Force 13 Live. Stay tuned for more. Continues in a moment. You can also help the project become even better by becoming a patron. You can see more information about all the benefits involved by visiting patreon.com/Force13. With a special thanks to these people for being our most valued patrons this month. You can also check out our growing merch store so you can show Force 13's colors wherever you go. You can also find a link to our Discord server underneath this video in the description. You're watching